Eyes up, pencils down. It's school time. Yeah, you probably guessed it from the intro, but we are back again with another long play lesson drop video. I wanted to go over something today which I've actually already done a video on previously, which is doing the green glowing weapons on Necrons. I understand that Necrons are a really popular army at the moment, and that video's got quite a few clicks as a result of that. But I think breaking that down into a long play video and actually showing the process over an extended period, painted in real time, could be really helpful for some people. So we're going to cover a Necron Overlord, we're going to be painting the power glaive type thing that he's got and putting that nice green glow on it. We're just going to concentrate on one side. So here is now the extended long play of me and my student going over a lesson dealing with that Necron. So for these glowing effects, the easiest way for me to show you would probably be with these two Citadel paints, because obviously I know you already have this one and I'm pretty sure you either have this one or you can get this one.
Yeah, I have it there.
Cool. So the easiest way is probably going to be for me to show you with these two. I wouldn't necessarily personally use these two. I do, as well as these, I do tend to use something like Ice Yellow or Sunny Skin Tone as well as a mixer. These two colours are kind of legendary in the mini painting world as mixers. You sort of use them to create highlight tones. But we will primarily work with these two paints because these are the two that are going to be obviously easiest for you to use. So what I'm mixing initially on my palette is I've just got a spot of Caliban green, a spot of moot green, and then I'm just making a mix of both colours equally here in the middle. And then I'm just adding a lot of water to it. I'm going to take this very thin. Do you use a wet palette when you paint?
No, I don't have a wet palette.
Okay, that's another thing that I would consider buying. The good news is that if you have Amazon in your country, then they're very easy to acquire. There are a few very good ones on Amazon, or of course you can make one if you're on a budget and don't want to spend the money on one. But wet palettes make this technique a lot easier because they prevent your paints from drying out, and weirdly, the more water you add to your paints, the faster they dry out. I know that sounds crazy, but you can experiment with this for yourself. When you place very thin down paints onto a miniature, you will notice that they dry a lot quicker than when you place very thick paints onto a miniature, which is why when you wet blend, you tend to wet blend with thicker paint because you need more working time.
I mean, it makes sense. The more water to not water ratio you have, the more exposed, the less things holding the water you have.
Exactly. So you can see why it sort of makes sense. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to take that Caliban green, and on my tissue here, from a fully loaded brush, I'm going to immediately wick most of that paint off of my brush. So this paint is extremely thin. You saw how much water I added to it. And I've also now taken most of it off of my brush. It's still there. You can see when I paint with it, but it's very transparent. And it's by building up this very transparent paint slowly over time that we're able to make nice transitions. So to start out with, let's say that we want the tip to be very bright. So we're going to take this edge here and we're going to push towards the tip. Okay? And then we want a contrast in this direction, so we're going to push downwards towards the center.
Yeah, I've had an attempt at this with another miniature with the Plasmancer. Okay. I've probably not thinned the paint enough though. I mixed moot green and I've actually thinned it with a glaze with Waywatcher green.
Okay. What that probably means, if you thinned it with one of Citadel's glaze paints, what that probably actually means is just that it was a bit too intense with pigment. The water actually does a lot of work here, and thinning them down to get them transparent is the aim. So when you thin them with a product like a Citadel glaze, which is essentially like an acrylic ink, they're sometimes still a bit too intense, and that can be what makes it difficult to get the process to work properly. But what you will notice with this technique is that when you first start doing it, it looks like nothing is happening, and that's always the sort of remark that I get from people. Oh, I've tried this glazing technique before, but it just looks like nothing is happening, and then the next thing I know, I've ruined my miniature. And unfortunately, it's learning to be patient through those stages where nothing's happening that actually helps you get good at the technique. So again, on this side of the blade, we can do the same thing. We can glaze toward the tip from here and toward the center from here. You can see that I'm starting to get some color now. It's not super strong at this stage, but you can see that there is color just starting to appear in my blade. One of the reasons I'm not using the hairdryer here is mostly because I want you to be able to see where the wet paint is so that you can understand where I'm placing it. You know, when it comes to something like this, where I'm placing it isn't very important because I'm placing it over the entire area of the metallic paint. But when it comes to this, I'm placing it in very specific areas, so I want you to be able to follow that and understand where the paint needs to go. You'll notice, for example, that my strokes never start at the very middle of the blade because I want black here. I want black here, here, and here, so that I've got sort of 3 points of absolute black on the blade. And so I never start my stroke in those areas where I want absolute black. I just move up a little bit first and then begin my stroke. Same here, I want absolute black here because I want a point of contrast between the brightest and the darkest area. So I move down a little and I start my stroke a little bit lower. And again here, I don't want black around here because I want to create a contrast with the bright side here. So I start my stroke a little higher. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It will make more sense visually when we actually get enough of this paint built up for you to be able to see the effect. But initially, while I'm explaining it, it is a little bit abstract because obviously the paint that I'm putting on the miniature is doing almost nothing right now. It's barely having an effect on the look of the miniature. But what you can see is that it dries so quickly. What I was saying about, you know, adding more water to your paint makes it dry quickly. So this is the 50-50 mix of Caliban and Moot Green next.
So how many layers of the Caliban did you put on first?
It's probably about 5, maybe 6. It does vary because obviously the exact amount of water that you use might not be the exact amount of water that I use. The really important thing is to make sure that your brush is very, very clean when you apply it. So, you know, you go from a fully loaded brush and you really do soak off almost all of the paint. That's going to just allow you to make sure that it's smooth as it applies. And you can see that there's still plenty of paint left in that brush. So what I'm going to do now is move up a little bit further and start to apply this brighter green over the top of the Caliban. So I'm leaving a bit more space so that there will be some Caliban left behind. And now I think you start to see the fade appearing. I think this is where you begin to see the fade appearing. One of the nice things about how slow this is, whilst it is a little bit irritating having to slow down this much, you know, it can really test your patience. But something that's really wonderful about it is you get a lot of opportunities to see your mistakes before they're too serious. And if you do make a mistake, because we're always glazing in one direction, because we always know the way our brush strokes are going, if we make a mistake, we just go back to the previous color and start to pull back down in the opposite direction, and it will correct it away. So whilst it can be a bit frustrating having to slow down this much, it does have that really nice comfort of you knowing that your mistakes are very easy to fix. There we go. We're really, really starting to get the effect now. If I just pull the exposure up a little bit on my camera, let's just go to, there we go. That'll enable you to just see this blend a little bit better.
Yeah, I can definitely see the blackest spots in contrast.
Yeah, and that's what we're looking for. We really have to make sure that for a blend like this to be successful, we have to demonstrate the full range of colors. So we have to make sure that the darkest point of our blend is clearly visible, and we have to make sure that the brightest point of our blend is as opposite to that as possible. And it's by placing these opposites in contrast beside each other that we create the glowing effect. So the actual quote-unquote glow is entirely artificial. Nothing is actually glowing, but we're fooling the eye into thinking that it's glowing because we're using these points of opposite contrast. If you look just here, I'll just give you a very close zoom for a moment. If you look just here, my transition is just a little bit clunky here. I'm not 100% happy with it. So in order to fix that, I can just grab my original Caliban green and just pull down a little bit, and that will just help blend that transition back for me. I can do the same up here if I wish. Just make these little micro corrections to it if I need to. Sometimes it will go in just perfectly smooth first time and you'll be really happy with it. And sometimes it will do everything it can to fight you, and you'll have to make loads of corrections along the way. It really just depends on how slow and steady you take it. If you rush, it's more likely to give you problems. Making sure that each layer is completely dry before you place another one over it is the most important part. And obviously, as I said, your brush load as well, making sure that your brush isn't overloaded. We're almost there for this colour. We're almost ready to move to the next one. I should probably remember to apply some paint to this part as well. It's going to look incomplete otherwise. And do this thing that I do where I test it on my hand. This isn't just because it's convenient. Your hands are a really, really good place to test because you'll have like little veins, for example, that run through your hands. And if you can see your blue vein through the paint, then obviously you know that the paint is transparent enough. So your hands are a very good testing area for paints. You can also obviously do what I did here, where you lay one paint over the other to check transparency. Your hands are a really good tool to be able to tell you how transparent your paint is.
So this is okay.
It looks like it might still be just a little bit too solid. If you compare it to mine.
Oh, add more water then.
Exactly, yeah. The good thing is water is free, right? So it doesn't matter if you have to add more.
Yeah. We say the same thing about ice in bartending.
Yeah. Okay, so I've probably got this to the point now where I can move forward to the final green. And then once we've got all three of the greens down, then we can start to just do a few little flash things, which I'll show you at the end. So I'm going to grab the moot green next, the brightest of our three paints. I just want to make sure that
so
layer...
This should be good, right?
I can't quite see right now. There we go. Yeah, that looks okay. Yeah, that should be fine. And like I say, you know, probably at least 5 coats per colour, and always make sure that you let each coat thoroughly dry. That's really, really important. If the previous coat is still wet, then you will tear the paint as you apply the next layer, and you will see gaps appearing in it. You'll see these sort of holes appearing in it. So I'm now at the brightest colour. Which is also obviously the smallest highlight, which means that it's the least painting time and the most drying time. And obviously Necrons are quite good now as well. You know, they're also just quite a powerful army.
Yeah, they were pretty powerful in 7th edition too because of the flyers thing. But yeah.
Right, yeah. Yeah, flyers were really broken in 7th, weren't they? That was one of the editions I missed.
You could only hit them on 6s. That was the thing.
God. That's terrible. Whose idea was that?
So the competitive lists were either Necron flyers or things specifically meant to tackle Necron flyers.
Jeez. A 2-pillar meta. It's worse than Magic the Gathering. The main part of my green blends are done now, so I'm just going to grab a little bit of black and just make sure that I've got nice tidy edges. This edge here in particular I noticed was just getting a little bit messy. So I'm just using a tiny bit of pure black just to make sure that that's nice and sharp. And then this one down here as well. Very careful brush strokes just to ensure that those areas are nice and looking beautiful. And then we perhaps just need well, actually no, we can move on. So from here now that we've got the basic blend in, the next kind of important step is to start getting a good strong sort of glowing effect. Sorry, I'm still tidying up while I'm talking. One of the first things that I think is important with that is to get a bit of edge highlighting done. So again, you know, nice thin paint and just trace around some of the edges with one of your lighter greens. This, again, you can just, you know, side brush this. You don't have to be able to paint really accurate, perfect brush strokes, because you can just use the side of your brush against the sharp edge to guide your brush stroke. So it's, you know, it's quite simple. We keep it quite easy. We can do more advanced versions of this where we edge highlight around all of these circular shapes in the middle. That's something that the Games Workshop really loves to do. But it is very difficult, and so I don't tend to advise most painters to bother with it, because I think it's, you know, an extra sort of 40 or 50% of effort for about an extra 5% of looks nice, you know. It doesn't feel like a good exchange rate to me. I can, now that I've got all the tidying up done. So I've put this edge highlight around the outside. That's one nice thing that we can do. I also just want to introduce just a few sort of really bright spots. When Games Workshop do this, sometimes they'll go all the way up to white. They'll bring these blends really, really bright. I don't necessarily think you need to go all the way up to white. I think that's maybe a bit too much. But I do definitely think that you can go a bit brighter with them just on the very tips. So I quite like to just mix a little bit of any sort of bright paint into the moot green and just do a little bit more of a glaze just at the very, very tips. I need to just be a little bit patient here. At the very tips, it's just taking a little bit longer to dry now. The final thing I want to show you is kind of just a trick. This is something that I do this because sometimes when you create a blend like this, you can spend a really long time working on it, and you kind of get a little bit sick of looking at it. You know, you don't maybe pay as much attention to it as you should. And at some point in this blend, there might be like a couple of blotches or a couple of errors, and you're not quite sure where in the process you made a mistake. And the last thing you want to do is just paint the whole thing black and start again, right? That would be awful. After you've just spent, you know, I mean, we took probably about 40 minutes just to do this one side of the blade, right? And if we're going to do the other side of the blade as well, that means that the whole blade is probably going to end up being at least an hour and a half.
Yeah.
What we really don't want to do then is not be able to figure out where we've made a mistake and have to start the whole thing again to correct it. So if we accept the fact that there may be a bit of blotchiness here or there, and what I actually did was at a couple of points in this process, I sort of deliberately rushed a little bit to create just some slight mistakes, and they're very small. You see, if I zoom very closely, they're not huge mistakes, but there's just a couple of areas where the paint transition isn't as smooth as you might want. This is probably the most noticeable one just here. So what we do with those is we mix a really, really pale green. You can see here on my palm, it's almost a white. It's like a green white. And we'll just create, just with the very tip of the brush, we'll create a little final point of light at the extreme edges of the blend. I'm just really carefully tracing this on the very, very extreme edges. Tiny bit just down here. Not a lot. Just a little. Tiny bit just up here. And then we'll grab the same color, and you need to make sure that the point on your brush is really nicely maintained for this. Twist your brush to get a really good point on it. And we'll just stipple a few small dots. Create some movement and some texture. These, you know, they need to be really small, and this is it's tricky. It's probably the hardest part of this whole process, but we're only going to do it in a really small area, so we only have to do that extreme concentration for just a couple of seconds, you know. It's tough, but we're going to keep it really minimal so that it doesn't make us sick of painting, basically. Just by building up that little bit of deliberate texture, it confuses your eye and makes it a bit harder to concentrate on any mistakes that might be present in the blend. And so the blend itself suddenly looks so much smoother because we've created texture there as a distraction from the smoothness. So we've still got this really nice sweeping blend of greens, but it looks even smoother now because it has a contrasting point of texture over the top of it. And again, I'll zoom that really close for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it also makes it looks more metallic.
Yeah, it creates a bit of, you know, the illusion of light. And again, you know, there are always ways that you can develop these things further. If you like that and you think it looks good, and you want to, you know, continue to concentrate further on it, you can go, you know, brighter again, and make even smaller highlights. And this, you know, this starts to become a case of how far can you push your brush control, which for me is not much further than this. You know, I have quite good brush control, but I'm not on the level of some of the best guys out there. People like Darren Latham, who have levels of brush control that are hard to comprehend for a lot of people. But you can obviously go even brighter, and then if you really want to take the biscuit, you can go all the way up to pure white. Get a little bit of pure white on the tip of your brush, and just, I mean, we're talking a dot here, you know, we're not even talking a line, just a tiny dot of pure white in the most extreme final edges of the workup. And these last couple of steps, obviously, they're done with, you know, normal sort of layer thickness paint. So they are kind of instant, whereas all of our glazing is very slow and steady. So there you have it, a nice sit down where we went over some glowing green Necron weapons. I did also incorporate some metallic techniques into that lesson as well, but I thought maybe those would probably be better saved for another day. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you took something away from it. If you do have any comments or suggestions when it comes to these long play videos, please do feel free to post them in the comments. And of course, remember, if you want to book in a private lesson yourself, all of my social media and contact details are in the description, so you can get in touch and get at me that way if you want to arrange something. So folks, thank you as always for watching the video. If you liked it, please do leave it a thumbs up to let me know that you liked it, and you could consider subscribing to the channel and enabling notifications if you want to stay up to date on what I'm doing over here on YouTube. You can of course also pledge to me on Patreon if you wish to support the creation of this content. I have tiers starting from $1 a month, and that can get you all sorts of little cool bonuses, scaling all the way up to and including free lessons like this one. So I'm going to get out of here now, roll the end credits, but I will see you in the next one, folks. Thanks for watching.